And here we are, and here we go. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Yes, we are live. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to say good morning to my spirit guide, Grey Eagle, who, as I always tell you, and as is always the case, is standing to my right side. And I'd also like to say good morning to Kris. Good morning, Kris.
Good morning, Rosemary. Good morning, everyone.
It occurs to me as my head is bobbing about, I've got all sorts of things going on behind me. It might look as if I've got horns or something sticking out of my head or, whatever. There are all the things that's behind me. Anyway, I should have moved them, but there we have it. Right. So, how are you, Kris, today?
Uh, I'm fine and dandy, just as
Fine
I was
and
on
dandy.
Thursday.
What?
Just as I was on Thursday.
Yes. And the same applies to me. I'm fine and dandy too. Now, I'm excited today. I'm excited about this morning because we had talked on Thursday about our show today, focusing on, you know, what what do we do, what can we do, what things should we not do when we have a loss. And we thought today, my story today is probably about what not to do, and I'm hoping that it's going to set up some kind of a conversation or get some comments from everybody watching. And maybe even those of you who have had a loss or are suffering a loss, maybe some of you do have some ideas of what to do. And Kris, I think it's fair to tell you at this point in time that we have Mike joining us this morning.
Excellent.
And maybe you perhaps would like to talk about uh, you know how you are coping, and or any ideas that you might have to share with people who are suffering a loss. Some people who are joining us today may not know of your loss, but for those of you who don't know, and for those of you who do, and here's a reminder that Kris lost her fabulous, beautiful, wonderful husband. When I say lost, he's raising his eyebrows at me. So, no, you didn't lose him, Kris. He is around, but it is nevertheless a physical loss. Uh, how many weeks is it now?
16.
So 16 weeks ago. So, gosh, time flies. And, it's hard when you suffer a loss. It's hard to know how you got from when it happened to him. I'm sure, Kris, you look back and you think, is it only 6 weeks? Or you think, oh my gosh, it's been as long as that. So that all of that turmoil that goes on in people's minds and in people's lives when they lose someone they love. And Mike, as we know, I'm going to make him blush as he's standing looking at me. Mike, as we know, is a very, very fantastic and lovely, lovely man. I think that when people who knew Mike describe Mike, they would use the word lovely to describe him. A quiet, gentle giant of a man. So anyway, so the story that we're going to tell, the story that I'm going to tell to you this morning, because as you all know, I'm sure today is Saturday morning and it's story time, everybody. For those of you who didn't join us on Thursday and you're just joining us now, yes, yes, you can see I'm not in New York City anymore. I do not have the portrait behind the wall that I do when I'm in New York. So here I am. I'm back in Florida. It is a glorious and a sunny, sunny day today, and it's sort of perfect weather. It's getting to be that sort of nice, a little bit cooler, but gorgeous weather that we get in Florida. The heat has gone out of the sun. It's still warm, by the way, but it's just this time of year is just so lovely for so many different reasons. And so, Kris, before I begin my story time, are there any comments or questions that we might want to hear before we begin?
Mostly everyone's saying good morning to you, and giving heartfelt support to me.
Good. Well,
So
good,
thank
good.
you, everyone.
And I do hope you all know that I did say to Samantha, I think I might have said it to Kris, I know I said it to one or two of my friends, while I was in New York, you know, you can only take a limited amount of clothes with you. So I always like to take sort of black, cream, and pink. Well, I forgot the cream this year. I took black and pink, and I said I'm not going to wear black and pink for at least a month because that's all I've been wearing while I've been away. And look what I did this morning without thinking about it and talking to you all now. I'm wearing black and pink together, but at least it's different than what I have been wearing. I've finally got my closet back. I can go in there and I can and look at my closet, totally bemused because there are far too many choices for me. All right, so shall we begin, Kris? So
I think we should.
are you sitting comfortably, everybody? Because, you know, when I was a kid on the radio, they used to have every afternoon, and then when Samantha was a child as well, they may, for all I know, still do it on the BBC radio. They would have a story time, and they would always begin, now, children, are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. So that's what I'm going to do. I shall begin once upon a time. Some of you may have heard this story before. So once upon a time, many years ago, going back to the Second World War. You didn't expect that, did you? Going all the way back to the Second World War. And I'm going back to England during the Second World War. Where there was a young woman and a young soldier. And they met up, probably, I'm going to say, let's make it London. I don't know where, but let's say they met up in London, because we're going to embellish the story slightly in that, you know, he was a young soldier and he was about to be shipped off to war. And she was a young woman, and everybody, you know, in those days, you can imagine it. All the boys, all the young men were leaving, and all the young girls were bereft, because, you know, that some left, some were losing their boyfriends, some were waving off their spouses, whatever. Anyway, so here was this young woman and this young man, and he was going to be shipped off the next day. So they met, and because he was going to be shipped off the next day, and she may never see him again, they decided, and this happened all the time, they decided that they would get married. You could get married like that, you know, just because it was easy in those days to do that. And so they got married, and consequently then spent the night together. They may have had a couple of days together, but anyway, so here they are, and they spent the night together, and he went off to war and she went home. And 9 months later, there was, you know, a gift of a little girl. So now the woman, who was still waiting news of her husband, she'd only known him a few hours, remember, but he was her husband, and she's waiting news of him. And at some point, when the baby was still very young, she got the news that he'd been killed in action. Now she's a young widow with a baby. And during those few hours that she'd spent with her husband, he had given her a photo of himself in his uniform. So she had this photograph produced and put in frames all over the house. She, in fact, made somewhat of a shrine to this young man she barely knew. But he was the father of her child. And so now what happens? Now, 40 odd years go by, and the neighbor of mine living across the street was the daughter now 40 something years old, 40, 42, something like that. And I got to know her. I didn't really know her story. I didn't know that her father had been killed. I didn't know much about her at all, but I did meet her mother, who by this time was well into her 60s, and uh, still a widow. So now the story sort of unfolds. So the mother-in-law, I wish I could remember her name. Shall we give her a name? The mother-in-law, let's call her Anne, right? Learns that I'm a spiritual medium. Well, of course, what does she do? She immediately books an appointment and comes to see me. And she obviously came with the intention of connecting with her husband, who, through these 40 some years, she had blown up in her mind into a god. She'd never dated anybody else. She'd never gone out with anybody else. She had lived her life as a widow, focusing on her daughter, in fact, trying to control her daughter in many, many ways, because her daughter became her entire life. And so when she came to see me, she was so excited. She knew, absolutely knew, that the first person and the only person who would want to contact her from the spirit world would be her husband. So I saw her mother and her father and her uncles and her whoever else in her family. And in fact, we had a whole crowd of people from the spirit world who came to talk to this lovely lady. And the more I spoke with her mother and her father and her relatives, the more annoyed and the more angry she became, because the one person, the absolute one person who she wanted to speak to, was not there. And she kept saying to me, I'm not interested in my mother. I don't care about my father. Where is my husband? Eventually, I'm asking Greg now. You can imagine that I'm getting quite desperate now, because I know that this is really what she wants. And I don't yet quite know the history of how she's lived her life in the 40 some years. And even though I knew her daughter a little bit as a neighbor. And so finally I said to Grey Eagle, what's going on? Where is he? Can we find him at all? Is it possible for him to speak to us? And so this man who had died 40 some years previously finally made an appearance. Now, just to point out to all of you that just because we might want to connect with someone in the spirit world, if they don't want to connect to us, well, too bad. They're not going to do it. They don't have to do it. Nobody's forcing them to do it. But he did, in fact, make an appearance. So finally, I was able to say to her, I have this man here, and I described his uniform, and I gave her his name, and I, described how he looked, and she was so excited. She was beside herself. She began to cry, and finally, after 40 something years, she finally had her husband back. And I'm really pleased. I'm thinking, thank goodness for this. This is working beautifully, until I heard his voice say to me quite clearly, quite precisely, as I described him and described his uniform and described who he was, now, Rosemary, now tell her to go away and leave me alone. I was a little shocked, because nobody had ever said that to me before. I'd never had that experience with anybody in the spirit world before. Tell her to go away and leave me alone. I've got this 60 some year old lady sitting on the sofa next to me, blubbering and crying and excited and ecstatic. And let me ask you all a question as you're listening to this story. Would you have dared to say that to her? Not me. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to tell her that this person that she had revered for all of these years did not want to speak to her. So I carried on speaking to her mother and her father and all of these other people, because as much as I said to this young man, not so young anymore, is there anything else you'd like to say? Is there anything else you want to say? He was adamant and he refused to speak one more word. So even though she knew that I was real, even though her parents had given her a tremendous amount of evidence about what was going on and talked about the daughter and talked about her life and so on and so forth, she left my house really disgruntled, very, very upset, because she had not got the one thing that she wanted. I think she'd wanted her husband to tell her how much he'd missed her, to tell her that he loved her. But remember, you might think that this man is cruel. You might think, what a horrible thing that he did, until you find out the entire story. And I'll tell the entire story in a little bit. So, okay, so now my friendly neighbor across the street comes over to the house. She says, this is a few days out, she says, I understand my mother came to see you. And I'm thinking, oh no, what do I say? And I said, yes, she did. But I make it a point of never, it's a private consultation, I never make a point of telling anybody else what's going on. And she said to me, well, I understand that my father was there, but only briefly. So I said, well, yes. So she said, could I book an appointment to come and see you? Because I would like to see if he would get in touch with me. So I made the appointment, but having had the previous experience with her mother, I wasn't holding out much hope. And I did say to her, as I say to everybody, there are no guarantees that we can do this, So the time came, and she came in and she sat down with me, and before I'd even begun to explain, before I'd even begun to take a breath, you've guessed it, I hope you've guessed it, there he was, her father. And unlike the time before, when he refused to say any more than tell her to go away and leave me alone, unlike that time, I could not stop him talking. He talked about when she was a baby. He talked about her growing up. He talked about her schooling. He talked about her going to university. He talked about so many things, and so many private things. And then at some point, he began talking to her about her mother, but not particularly about her mother, but about her relationship with her mother. And he said, talked about the fact that he knew how controlling her mother was, and how difficult life had been for her because of her mother. Because her mother had been very possessive of this girl and wouldn't let her go out and wouldn't let her have boyfriends, and so etc., to the point where the girl actually ran off to get married to her husband, who then she divorced years later. But her father was talking about her life intimately, in every detail, letting her know that he'd always been with her, that he'd always been by her side. But then he explained to me, and letting his daughter know, how difficult sometimes that had been for him to watch. Because, so here is the thing, and here is the thing that you must not do. Do not make a shrine to your loved ones in the spirit world. You love them, you adore them, you think of them. By all means, have a photo, or even 3 or 4 around the house. But do not close yourself off to life. And this is what this young soldier explained to his daughter, no matter what. Her mother, his wife, of a few hours, and her mother had completely wasted almost every moment of her life, wallowing in widowhood, wallowing in grief, wallowing in the if onlys, building him up to be something that he wasn't. She didn't even know who he was because she barely knew him at all. The only reason they got married was so they could go to bed together, because you remember in those days it wasn't quite done. And he had watched so painfully while she put all of that grief and all of that distress and all of that disappointment onto her daughter. And she had lived her entire life, wasted her entire life, wishing and hoping and mourning for things that could not possibly happen. So I have to say the daughter was thrilled to bits, and her mother was really furious when she went home and told her mother, well, you know, he said this and he said that and he said so and so forth and so, and her mother was furious. And sure enough, one day a knock came at my door, bang, 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 pounding on the door, and there she stood, the mother, totally irate. And I fetched her into my little study, and she sat there and she shouted at me, and why this, and why does she get it all, and you didn't tell me any of this. And I very kindly and very gently held her hands, and I said, I think what your husband wants you to do is to live your life. And so far, you haven't lived your life. You're trying to live your life vicariously through your daughter and your grandchildren, and you have no life of your own. You have wasted all of these years mourning for something that could not possibly be, and mourning for a man you barely knew. And she broke down and she cried, and I held her tight. But of course, you know, and I know she's never going to learn, because 40 odd years is, you know, that's total habit. Every room in her house had photographs. This one photograph, every room in her house had a photograph of him. Every time she read anything, she would write letters to him. She would spend days and days crying, years and years crying, mourning. And he, every time he visited and every time he came to visit his daughter, had to listen to this woman, this desperate and pathetic woman, ruin her life, and also in some ways her daughter's life, because she mourned not for the man, she mourned for all of the possibilities and all of the things she thought she didn't have. An example of someone who thinks that their glass is half empty instead of somebody who thinks that their glass is half full. She could have celebrated those few moments, those few hours. She could have been glad of them. She could have celebrated her daughter. She could have been thrilled to bits that she had the chance to have this beautiful child. She could have celebrated the fact that life is for living. She could have gone out on dates. She could have found somebody else who loved her, who cared for her, who she loved and cared for. What a waste. What a terrible, terrible waste of a life. I had a similar case of a woman who had lived her life with her husband. She was well into her 70s, and she came to me for one reason only. When will my husband die? That was her question to me. I just want to know when he's going to die. I've lived all of these years miserable and unhappy, not leaving him because he's got plenty of money. And if I leave him, I won't be entitled to it when he dies. And I just want to know, how much longer do I have to wait? There are lots of reasons why people stay with someone. There are lots of reasons why people mourn a loss. In the story today, was it selfish of this woman to mourn her husband and to delve into her own deep grief and deep mourning? She couldn't possibly have been in deep mourning for a man she only knew a few hours. She was in mourning for the loss of all of her hopes and dreams and wishes. But had she not, you know, gone overboard, she could have had a chance at that over and over and over again through the 40 years of her life, had she let go. Clear warning to any of us who've had a loss, clear warning to any of us that, if we look down, if we look and only see the dark clouds, if all we ever see is a glass half empty, then we're going to be miserable in our lives, as this lady was miserable in her life. And has she made her daughter miserable as her daughter was growing up? Clear warning. Let's have a glass half full, shall we? And let's understand that just because we love people in the spirit world does not mean that because they've gone from us, our lives are ended. It's just simply a new phase. Tough, difficult, grit your teeth, hard. There'll be lots of tears, lots of crying, of course. We have to deal with the grief, of course. But it is not the end of our lives. It's simply the end of a life lived with somebody else. And then we move on. And as I have Mike here, I'm going to give him the very final comment in this Once Upon a Time story. He's so proud of Kris because, as hard as it is, and as many tears as she cries, and as much as she tells me, I'm nodding at Mike, as much as she tells me I'm fine and dandy, she said this morning. She's not really, of course she isn't. But boy, oh boy, is she trying. And she's trying to make him proud, and he wants you to know, Kris, that he is. So there you go. That's my story. The end. How
And
you
you're
doing,
gonna
Kris?
and you're gonna expect me to talk after that?
Oh well, you can you can you make a couple of comments, and then I'd like to hear from people who, because I know there are so many of you listening, and you're struggling with your grief, and you're struggling with your pain, and some of you have lost children, and some of you have lost spouses, and some of you have lost siblings, and some of you have simply lost good friends. But through all of those losses, I think that the thing that we can get from this story is we mustn't lose ourselves. So, any comments before you comment?
Oh, any comments from me? There was a portion of right toward the end where it was like one of those moments where you could have heard a pin drop. Um, where you look at all the loss in your life, grandparents, parents,
Yeah,
siblings,
yeah,
best friends, spouses, kids who have died too young. And then you try to put your actionable advice into each of those pockets to see where you could do better. Um, it definitely helps to reframe loss and grief in an actionable way, is what my comment would be.
right.
Your story does.
Yeah. And so, okay. So I think that at some point in the show today, we should give a few practical tips as well. Those obvious ones, keep yourself busy. But if you are depressed and suffering and in pain and suffering with your grief, it's very hard to keep busy, isn't it? And because everywhere you look, you're reminded of that person that you have lost. And every time you try to, get up out of bed, it's an effort and so on. But, you know, who said that life was easy? I always used to say that to my daughter when she was a little girl. Mummy, it's not fair. It's not fair. And even with Reese, when he says it's not fair, which he doesn't do very often, but occasionally. And I always used to say to my daughter, did I ever tell you that life was fair? I don't think I've ever said that to you ever, because it isn't. Life is not fair. Still beautiful though, still exciting, still a joyful thing, but not necessarily fair. Okay, Kris, let's have some comments or questions or anything going on here.
Yeah, Sharon says, after I lost my mom, I was in absolute agony. It still hurts, but I now have absolute faith that she is safe and happy. Prayers are so important.
They are. I'd love to know, you know, if there was one particular moment where that faith was solidified, where you just absolutely knew she was there, and that way you could move on with your life. So if anybody would like to comment on those things, that would be great. Kris, keep going.
Jeff says, I've gotten a lot of comfort from the idea that, quote, no one leaves us before their time, end quote.
Yes, I think, is that my quote? Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah,
I think
it
it's
is.
mine. Well, anyway, even if it isn't, I'm taking it because I say it so often. And
Well,
I
it's
do believe, I absolutely do believe that people cannot leave us before their time.
well,
Yes,
Jeff and Andrea's dear Eric went young, so that's great that that's what's helping Jeff and Andrea.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Let's see. Eric's asking a question. The physical universe is vast. Is there another universe in the spirit world?
Well, I think, Eric, I think that there are many, many universes that are out there, and scientists are beginning to realize that, and in fact, have begun to realize that a long time ago. You know, the telescopes that we have, those, you know, those powerful things that look out into the universe so that we can find this stuff out. And, you know, now we can actually, you know, literally see the surface of the moon, whereas 100 years ago, there was no such telescope to see those things. And it's always surprising to me that there are people who think they are of scientific mind who will say, no, 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 this is absolute science tells us this is what it's like, until the next breakthrough. And then, oh, well, no, well, now we know a bit differently. And this is what it's like. Nothing is set in stone here. The universe and these man-made creations that we have, the, you know, the telescopes, the machines, and so on. I mean, who knows where they're going to take us in the future? That, you know, rocket to the moon, and you know, and sort of discovering so many things that we didn't know before, we couldn't possibly know before. And true scientists, as you'll see, there's a quote on the back of my book, The Eagle and the Rose, from one of the first men in the moon. A great scientist said, you know, uh, a scientist is someone who is open minded and willing to understand that there is more to this life than we can possibly know or see. Uh, so it's always the next telescope or the next instrument that tells us these things. You know, we think. I mean, can you just think back, everybody, to the caveman who thought the world was flat? Uh, can you imagine thinking the world was flat? Can you imagine that if you thought you walked too far, you'd fall off the end? Um, and of course, we know now that isn't the case. But we are, in so many ways, as ignorant of things as the caveman was, because however far we've come from the caveman thinking the world is flat to where we are now, there's still at least as much, if not even more, distance to go. Who knows what we're going to discover in the future? Kris?
Tracy says you only get what you need from the spirit world, not what you want.
Yes, it's so true. When people come to see me, you know, they often get something they perhaps didn't want, because they often get the truth, and sometimes it's put gently but bluntly, and sometimes those in the spirit world tell us things that we don't always want to know or to hear, perhaps about ourselves or about, you know, the family or family life. I'm thinking of very recently having a lady who came to see me, and when she came to see me, her main focus was on, you know, when would it be the right time for her to divorce her husband, and uh, she certainly didn't get what she wanted, because she had a husband who was lovely, and, and she was told so, and she basically had to kick up the bum and I think now their marriage is actually much stronger, much better, and she's no intention of getting a divorce anymore. But yeah, whenever we speak to those in the spirit world, it's not about what we want; it's about what we need that we get. Yes, Kris.
Rhonda says, every night for 30 minutes, I go outside and sit under the stars and talk to my dad.
Oh,
This has
nice.
helped me tremendously, and it's giving me such peace.
Oh, Wanda, that's a great thing to do. And those people who are listening, who are in grief, I think that's a really that is for me. Obviously, it's worked for you, and it's a piece of real practical advice. Don't let's we can all say think good thoughts, or you know think that always view your glass as half full in not half empty. Yeah, but how do we do those things? So we need practical advice. So we're looking for that practical advice, Wanda, that helps people that they can actually go and do something, or do something like that. And if it's too cold to sit out under the stars, or if you're not in a place to sit under the stars, then it's just find a quiet spot, find a quiet place in your house, and listen to music, or sort of things that remind you of your loved one and might make you cry, which is fine, but then talk to them as Wanda does. Talking to your dad is a very, very good, very practical, and hopefully very helpful piece of advice, Wanda. Thank you. Kris.
Jeff says, over time, after losing my son from our physical connection, I have come to know we enjoyed the 21 years we had together, and I smile into his spiritual presence.
I love that. I love that, Jeff. But how? Can we be practical? Okay. Uh, See, I'm a very practical person, and I like to give practical advice. If I'm making a cake, it's no good saying, and here's a chocolate cake, and you too can make a chocolate cake like that. Okay. So I might give you a recipe, which is fine. Look at the stars, or so much flour, or whatever it is. But then, well, all right, all well and good. I've got my flour, I've got my eggs, I've got my whatever it is I'm using. Um, what do I do with it now? So it's not enough to show the result. It's not enough to give the ingredients for the result. It's what do we do with the ingredients? How do we do that? So when I'm asking you all, can you give us some practical advice for those of you who are in grief and who really desperately need a little practical advice, things that you can actually do, sort of get up off of your bum and walk 3 steps, and so, that sort of thing. We need the detail, like crack the eggs into the bowl and whisk them up. Get the butter and whisk the butter and the sugar together, and blah blah. We need, can we have some practical advice? I'm a very practical, feet on the ground kind of a person, which is probably, I think, very beneficial to many people, because it's no good saying don't mourn the loss. It's all very well saying those things, and of course we mean that, and it's all very well saying and they are with you, but what do we do to know that? How do we know that? What are we supposed to do to stop mourning our loss? So let's have some practicality. Kris.
Loretta says, you have helped me through two of my devastating losses, and also therapy helps.
Oh, good. Well, there you go. Now, I do have to say about therapy, I know that there are some amazing therapists out there. I also know there are some not so amazing therapists out there. The same as, in any profession, even my own, there is good and there is not so good. So please, everybody, especially those of you who are in grief or depressed, or for whatever reason might think you might need a therapist or simply someone to talk to, make sure that you choose carefully. Kris.
Mary says, today is supposed to be National Daughter Day. My daughter,
Oh,
Lillian, is a beautiful, intelligent, creative, caring girl. I love hearing stories about you and Samantha. Does Gray Eagle have any advice for my daughter and me?
I'm going to I'm going to tell you a story. It is story time after all. I can tell two stories, right, Kris? So once upon a time, there's
Absolutely.
another story. I was at a wedding. Some of you may have heard me tell this story before. And Gregor is putting his hand on my shoulder, so he's joining in this story. I know you asked Gregor, but we're sharing this story for you. And we went to a wedding. It was a very spectacular wedding, I have to say. There were hundreds and hundreds of people at this wedding. It was a super, sort of expensive sort of thing. And everybody was wearing gorgeous clothes and all the rest of it. And my daughter was a part of the wedding process and stood up to give her speech in the church and so on. So we were a fairly integral part of the, of the close family. And so we had our table and we sat with some of the family at our table, and there was dancing and so on and so forth. And Samantha and I, we never really thought much about it. We'd spent time together before the ceremony. We'd spent time together at the ceremony, and now we were sitting at the table and we were spending time at the table too. And this was before she was married, by the way. This was, sort of a few years ago. And but she was a young, beautiful woman at the time, and uh, we just were who we were. And then a couple of times she got up and danced with friends, and then a few times I got up and danced with people, and then sometimes we'd dance with each other. But we were just a mother and a daughter, not paying any much attention to anybody else, but just enjoying ourselves and not realizing that other people were paying attention to us until we were on the dance floor, and this young couple came up to us and told us that they just got married and they were hoping to start a family. So they were telling us this, and Samantha and I were nodding away and listening to them. And then they said to me, um, we've been watching you. We've been observing you and Samantha. We've been watching you the whole day. And you have, the two of you, such an amazing and a special relationship, and it just shines out to everybody. So I smiled. I said, thank you. So then they said, could you please give us some tips? Because we want the relationship with our children that you obviously have with your daughter. So, for all of you out there who are mothers or grandmothers, whether it's daughters or sons or grandsons or granddaughters, whoever it is, I'm going to give you the piece of advice that I gave to this young lady. I said, just every day, no matter what goes on, no matter how mad you are with them, no matter how frustrated you are, no matter how tired you are as a parent, every day just make sure to say, I love you. And even sometimes you can say, I don't like you very much today, but I still love you anyway. Always tell your children every day, in every way, but not just show them, but you have to show them, of course, as well. But you sometimes, we need to hear the words, don't we? Those of you who out there who've had relationships and you've been disappointed in those relationships because either, your partner doesn't talk to you, or you don't talk to them, or he might talk to you, but he never says I love you, or she never says I love you. So it's a very important part of being a mother and a daughter, but it's also a very important part of any relationship whatsoever. You have to say, I love you. And you have to mean it. Even when you're frustrated with them, you can say, I really don't like you right now, but I do love you. Always remember to say it. That's my piece of advice. And Gregor is smiling at me and stroking my face as he tells me he loves me. So there you go. And Mike is saying, Kris, I love you. So he's still here and still involved. Keep going.
I love this love fest. Florrie's so going back to your story, Florrie says, "For me, the losses are the guilt of how I should have done things better. It's living with the guilt of not doing right, in my opinion.
Well, in my story, I don't think it's about that at all. I think it's, although I do see what you're saying, and I do agree to some point that there are people out there who suffer because they have the guilt of if only I'd done this or if only I'd said that. Well, there is a remedy to that, because even though your loved ones are in the spirit world, they still hear you. You can still say to them, you can still make amends. But I think in our story, I don't think it was that at all. I think it was a woman who was perhaps, in fact, I know, a retrospective soul. If you don't know what a retrospective soul is, about time you read Soul Signs. I know that she's a retrospective soul, always looking inward at what she did not have and what was wrong in her life, and then looking outward to blame others and to, be angry at others. So I think she was a retrospective soul and could not let go of the idea of her, perfect happy ending. So, but thank you for that, because I think that you're absolutely right. There are so many people who suffer. They're guilty. If only I'd said this. If only I'd done that. Again, I'll tell you another story briefly. I can remember a lady who came to see me who, she was a bossy little woman. She was very nice, actually. She was really lovely. She loved her husband, loved her family, loved her kids, but boy, oh boy, was she ever bossy. And instead of, sort of making her husband's life easier, the moment he came in from work, it was do this and do that and don't do this and why have you done that and what's going on? And never taking one moment to put her arms around him and say, how was your day? She's a really nice person. It just hadn't occurred to her because from day one of the marriage, probably, maybe even before they got married, this is who she was and this is how she started and this is how she meant to go on. And I said to her, and her loved ones in the spirit world basically said to her, you only have so much time. In that time, would you stop haranguing your husband and would you start loving him? It shocked her. It shocked her to realize that that's exactly what she was doing, that she was being a bossy boots and that she was controlling and wanting to control things and so on and so forth. But she was told life is not about you controlling it. Life, you can't control life and you never know what's going to happen. And it was made clear to her that she only had so much time. And she went home and she totally changed. She completely, I think it frightened her that, you know, something was going to change in her life and she better make the most of it. And thank goodness she did, because 2 years later she called me, can I come and see you, Rosemary? And she reminded me of what I'd said to her. And she said, I thank God and I thank my loved ones in the spirit world for telling me to stop being so bossy and to love my husband, because the last 2 years of our marriage were the very best before he died of a massive heart attack. So she had been able to rectify her, her attitude and the way she was. She'd been able to put it right. But there are so many of us who don't have that chance out there. So please remember, everyone, when you leave this show today, life is for living and for making the most of, and you never know when what you have will be taken away from you. So make the most of it while you can. Kris.
I'm reminded of a book I read recently from an entrepreneurial coach and a psychologist, an organizational psychologist. And they talk about it. The book is called The Gap and the Gain, where uh, I think they focus on the business world, but they're basically saying, is your glass half empty or glass full? Are you looking in the gap at everything you don't have instead of looking how far you've come from where you've started and
Right.
everything you've gained? And, you're here talking about relationships. And we can all frame it in different ways depending upon the situations that we're in, but it's all about what you've taught us. It's that tiny pulse, that first thought Where is it going to lead you? What
Yeah,
direction are you going to move with that thought?
yeah. That's right, and it is so important, isn't it, to stop looking at what you don't have and start focusing on what you do have. When you have a loss, and with this is, we're talking about this today, when you have a loss and you're in grief, it is, I know, it is so very, very hard, really, really hard to look at what you have and to be grateful for what you have. But if you work at it, no matter how hard it is, you can do it. um, Grit your teeth. I remember gritting my teeth, crying and crying, but gritting my teeth, thinking, I am going to do this. I am going to get better, despite. And even though tears were raining down my face, my determination was, you're not going to let this define you. You have to move forward with your life and find the good. Find the good in even the worst of relationships. Find the good in your children, in your grandchildren. If it's daughter's day, I'm going to call my daughter and say to her, as soon as this show is over, I'm going to call her and say, did you know it was daughter day today? She'll say, what? Isn't it daughter's day every day? Because in my book, it's daughter day and grandson day every single day. My grandson called me this morning. We're making pancakes. Are you missing me? Yes, I'm missing you. But we're making pancakes. And for the first time ever, he got the ladle and poured the batter actually onto the hot plate to make the pancakes. He always mixes and makes it, breaks the eggs and does that. But for the first time ever, he put the batter on the hot plate. Ooh, so isn't there joy in that? No matter how awful life can get for us, there is always joy, even in the tiny things, the flowers in the garden, the bees buzzing around, the butterflies around, all of that stuff. If we look for it, if we reach for it. But, before we do that, we have to force our eyes to open and force our heads up to look up and outward. Kris.
Judith says, I think I know what my family on the other side would tell me. They would say the same as Rosemary did. Get off your duff and do something.
Oh gosh, did I say that to you? It sounds it sounds so much like me. I know everybody thinks that a medium should be gentle and caring and loving, and I am all of those things, but I'm also a tough cookie too. Uh, am I, Kris? What do you think? Let's be honest here.
Well, when people say tough, there's different interpretations of tough. I always think of, what does they call it? Tough love. Like saying the thing that must be said that most people dread in saying. That kind of tough. Not like in stubborn tough or defiant tough. So it's different.
And not mean tough either.
Right. All right. So Elizabetta says, I would like to say that I believe in afterlife. I feel my grandmother next to me every time. I give to my friends my happiness, my quiet, my smiles, my way to effort bad moments because life is too short.
So right. Thank you for sharing that. Better. We love it. Okay, Kris.
Jeff's giving some practical advice.
Good. Oh, good, Jeff. Great.
I sit in silence, maybe with a cup of coffee, and thank him for coming and giving me a sense that he loves me. He guides me to share our experience with suicide and other tragic losses of children. My wife and I have been called many times by acquaintances who know of our journey to help folks just beginning this walk. I believe a form of meditation with our loved ones in mind strengthens the possibility of feeling our relatives' presence.
Well, Jeff, thank you. And so practical. Sitting quietly, paying attention, listening, learning to listen without any expectation whatsoever. I think that's very practical advice. And also, and for those of you listening, I know Jeff and Andrea very, very well. And what they do for other people, how they embrace other people, is another way of I think, helping yourself in grief, because you're sharing what you've gone through, and you're sharing, your struggles, your pain, and your heartache. Um, but in doing that, you're allowing other people to share their pain and their heartache with you. So, so I know that Jeff and Andrea are always available and always reaching out to others in similar situations. So again, practical advice. And for those of you who think, I'm never going to get over this, I'm never going to get over this, it's been 5 years since he or she passed, and how am I? Then you need to sort of find a group of people who are suffering the same kind of loss that you are, and go and be practical with them, talk to them, uh, let them help you. But more importantly, go with the idea that perhaps your pain and your hurt and the sharing of it can help other people, to see that they're not on their own. So instead of going inward and almost wallowing in your own pain and grief, if you can let it out and share it. So I think, I know that Jeff and Andrea do that. It does not stop the pain. Let's be clear, the pain of loss never goes away, especially the pain of loss of a child never goes away. But if you are practical with it and you use it sensibly and you share it, you will learn to live with it, and you will learn to move forward with it. Kris.
Busy with brilliance. Oh, I'm sorry. Now she's giving me the name. Chelsea. Chelsea says, I found your book like a miracle. I hear voices and other experiences that relate closely to your experiences. How does one know if they are meant to be a medium or are just crazy?
Well, look, don't be afraid to be a little bit crazy. I think all the best people in the world are people who have a little bit of craziness about them. Um, I think that there are many people who, as you have said yourself, you hear things, you sense things, you're aware of things, and it goes no further than that. But it's there for you, and it's there to help you, and it's there to guide you. And how wonderful that gift is, simply for you. Being a medium is very, very different. There are many aspects to mediumship. It's not just about talking to the spirit world. Kris and I, yesterday, we made a list, didn't we, Kris, of all the things that we're planning on doing. Wait till you see this list, everybody. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Of all of the things that we're planning on doing over the next, before I die anyway, however long it takes us. Um, but being a medium is not just about talking to those who have died. Being a medium is so, so, so much more, and is a many faceted, uh, let's say, a many faceted way of life. I was going to say a job, but it's more than a job. But there are many of you out there who do have a sense of and an awareness of those in the spirit world and your loved ones. And that gift is such a precious gift, and given to you to help you and to guide you. So don't think for a second that you're really, really crazy. A little bit crazy is good. Kris.
DNA, I don't know their first name, is
uh,
asking for healing. So, folks, if you want to send us an email to the office email, Kris, Kris, at rosemaryaltea.com, for anyone you want added to the healing list, that is the easiest way to get it done.
yes, unfortunately, as we said on Thursday, the chat room, we can only take so much, and Kris is only one person there, and every time she thinks that she's about to read something, the thing moves, the chat room moves and scrolls up or scrolls down, and sometimes she gets lost in it. So if you are a person who would like healing, please email us, Kris, Kris, at rosemaryaltea.com. Or if you forget Kris, just write Rosemary at rosemaryaltea.com. It all goes to her anyway. And if you put the word healing as in the subject line of your email, or if you want a consultation, or if you want to know where books are, or if you want to join our Healing Hands around the world, or and on, or if you simply want to be be part of the newsletter, subscribe. Go on the website rosemaryaltea.com. click the button subscribe, and every month you have a newsletter. So just all of those things. If you're unsure or uncertain, email us, and go to the website as well and subscribe there. And another thing we're also asking you to do for us and not for you is, can you share every time you see a show, every time you come to join us, share with your friends on Facebook. Kris?
Oh, we're right at time, Rosemary.
Well, good then. Well, that's it then, folks. I feel as if what is that cartoon? And they say that's all, folks.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
feel
I can
I
hear it in
feel as
my
if.
head now.
Pardon?
I can hear it in my head now.
I know, I know. Anyway, it's a Disney thing, isn't it? Anyway, we are at time, and so we've all got things to do. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I would like especially to say thank you to Kris, because she does an amazing, amazing job. We can't get to every one of you, but we're always here on Thursdays and Saturdays anyway, in the mornings at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to be popping in on our off-the-cuff stuff. And again, if you don't know about the off-the-cuff stuff, or you want to participate, or you hear about it afterwards, if you subscribe, I promise you it won't cost you anything. Go to the website, rosemaryaltea.com, click on the subscribe button. It just takes you straight to subscribe, and you'll get our emails from then on. You will not, I promise you, be inundated by them. We will not send you 1 or 2 or 3 every day, or even every week. We'll send you perhaps 2 or 3 in a month, maybe, because, don't you hate getting those emails that you just have to delete all the time, and they just keep sending them anyway? So we don't do that. So go to the website. I think that's the best thing I tell you to do, or email us, Kris, Kris at rosemaryaltea.com. And so we'll be popping it in off the cuff. And I said to Kris the other day, at some point in the next 2 or 3 weeks, maybe we'll have a cooking show again, because I've had so many of you say, well, I love Yorkshire puddings, but they always fall flat when I make them. So I thought I would actually make them in front of you, so you can see exactly what you have to do. And then I'll bring some out for you. And if they've gone flat, or if they're, it'll be live, so you'll see exactly how I'm producing them and what happens. And if they go flat, well, that's too bad. It's on me. But I've never had a flat Yorkshire pudding yet. Shouldn't say that, should I? Because boy, oh boy, am I setting
Knock on
myself
wood.
up. Pardon?
Knock on wood.
I know. Well, anyway, I'm pretty confident that they'll be fine. So anyway, so watch out for that. Watch out for us. And in the meantime, for all of you out there, once again, thank you. Thank you very much to my wonderful spirit guide, Great Eagle, as always. And in the meantime, we hope to see you again. In the meantime, please, all of you, have a very, very blessed rest of the day, and have a very blessed weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.